Welcome to the GrowthPulse Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the world of business-to-business sales. We talk to some of the world's leading salespeople, sales leaders, experts in sales technology, and thought leaders in today's best sales skills and techniques. In this episode, we're talking to Dan Lodge. Dan has worked with some of the world's most innovative sales organizations. He started his career as a BDR with Alterian and worked his way through to being a leading strategic rep and sales leader, moving to Salesforce, where he was one of the leading account execs in their fastest ever growing portfolio, the Marketing Cloud. He rounded out his account exec career with Dropbox, helping to launch their enterprise solutions globally. Stepping into leadership, Dan was the global VP of sales at BlueDot, a leading marketing platform in the geofencing space, and most recently was the global VP of sales for Cascade, a business strategy tech platform. From the GrowthPulse team, please welcome your hosts, Dan Bartels and Simon Peterson. Simon, how are you?
Good, Dan. How are you doing?
I'm really good. How's the last sort of week or so been? You been busy?
Yeah, I've been pretty busy. Lots of job interviews, and I went up to the farm for the weekend. Spent 3 days up near Mudgee. Awesome. Yeah, very relaxing, very cold, lots of fires. I actually chopped down a couple of trees for firewood too.
Excellent.
Got very busy. Yeah. How are you, mate?
Mate, I was down in Melbourne over the weekend. I had my daughter's 11th birthday, and she is a big Harry Potter fan. So we went down to see the Harry Potter show, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Very exciting.
Nice.
Quite a good show. Lovely. It's been a cold weekend down in Melbourne, which is always nice. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And we've got Dan Lodge.
So, Dan, who have we
got Dan
got
Lodge on today. Yeah. So very excited. He's obviously a superstar in the SaaS tech world and sales. Huge amount of experience. So very excited to talk to him. I'm super interested to sort of get an idea of his experience in sort of moving from big tech into the startup land and all those things in between. But close some of the biggest deals that I've seen in his enterprise sales career. So that's a pretty exciting thing as well.
Absolutely. And I believe he started as a BDR all those years ago. Can't wait to hear about it.
Absolutely. All right, let's bring him in. Hold on, Dan. Hold on. Here we go. Dan, welcome.
Gentlemen, good morning. How are you both?
Very, very good, mate. How was your weekend?
Very well.
Morning. Good. Yeah, it was a good one, actually. Birthdays, catching up with friends, and a fairly relaxing yesterday, which was wonderful for those in the long weekend. It's perfect. Real good.
Mate, you're still down at Bondi, aren't you?
Birthday weekend for me.
Still down at Bondi, mate. Still living the dream.
You're not part of these group of people complaining about apparently the trees going into, is it North or South Bondi, and they're all getting up in arms about it, apparently?
And you've got to complain, mate. I'm English. It's part of my DNA.
Yeah, we've got far too many trees at Bondi.
Well, Dan, thanks for joining the podcast. Sort of as per the intro, mate. Come with a significant resume. Like all things, we all suffer from imposter syndrome. When you hear someone talk about yourself, you're like, "Hold on, is that me?"
Yeah, exactly.
So, Dan, look, mate, as we kind of intro, look, you started as a BDR. When we worked together at Salesforce, you were one of the leading account execs in the Marketing Cloud space, off the Dropbox, working with our good friend Charlie Wood, and then went on to do a whole bunch of sales leadership roles after that. What do you reckon's the biggest difference or between being a BDR and a rep? What are your thoughts on that?
BDR and a rep. That's a really good question. I think it's a mindset, right? I think there's a certain amount of mindset there that you understand you've got to get your small wins as a BDR, but they're not small wins to you. As long as you're focused on your metrics and your numbers, I don't think they're dramatically different. I really don't. I think if you just get, you know what you've got to do to be successful. You know what you have to do. It's a proven equation. Number of calls, number of meetings, build your brand, onwards and onwards. That said, though, Dan, I know we had a conversation about this the other day. I don't know how I'd get on today being a BDR. I think the world's changed. What do you
Why
think,
is that?
Simon?
It's different. Yeah.
Well, I think it's different now.
It's very different.
Sorry, mate. The reason I think it's different is I don't think it's as successful anymore. I was reading a study the other day. It was one of the VCs, and they said that, I think even as close as 2020, 40% of outbound meetings generated or pipeline closed was from BDRs. And in the last year and a half, it's dropped down to about 18, 19%. So obviously the world's changed. I think we've got that great big elephant in the room with AI. But before we get to that, I think it's now a lot more about building your brand. And I think if you look at these reps that are being successful in certain verticals, not everyone, maybe not the enterprise stuff because they're sort of on a one-to-one relationship level, but people who are trying to generate inbound, a lot of it is building this business, building your own brand. And I think that that's such a big part of it now. And I think that people who don't embrace that and don't embrace this, sometimes it may not be you. You may find yourself, a little bit pressed to say these things. It might even sound cheesy coming out of your mouth. But the reality is it's content. You've got to be there. You've got to be visible. You need to be the expert in that space. It's no longer about going in and just doing your phone calls or just doing your emails and making sure your content's good. It's a bigger piece to it. You've got to be in the right places. You have to be visible. People don't pick up the phone call from cold calls as much anymore. So, when's the last time you answered a call that you didn't know the number? It's pretty rare. So you need to be building your brand. You need to be visible. You need to be connecting with people. You need to be commenting on their posts. I think social selling has gone right the way across that, being a BDR now is as important as that building your brand as it is to be an AE or even a CEO of your business.
Yeah. I notice a lot of BDRs probably rely too much on LinkedIn. What are your thoughts? I think I get a lot of LinkedIn messages from BDRs that go for the presumptive close as they're introducing themselves to you. It's highly fitting from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that as far as a direct channel to reach out. I think you're right. But I think that you need to be using LinkedIn in a different way. It's not about that presumptive close, I don't think. It's not about, here's my email message, accept me, and then I'm going to ask you for a meeting. I think that's gone. So, but I do think it's about, like I said before, appearing in the places, in these groups, in these other conversations with peers of people, just get in there and really sort of, be part of those conversations. Visibility.
I think, Dan, the other thing that's changed dramatically for an AE comparative to even when I started in sales. When I started my first direct B2B sales, I was in insurance broking. And, we had a full-time role. It was a female filling the role. So she was an admin assistant because it took so long for you to generate insurance contracts. It wasn't worth the business's time and effort to have me as a salesperson off the road building a proposal. So you put on a full-time executive to do that. Well, we use tech to do that now. And managing my calendar. Well, I've got Calendly and I've got all these things to speed all those processes through. And I think so much of that for that BDR role has now become, whether it's superfluous or it's just an unnecessary gatekeeping between what actually needs to happen. And to your point around having the right access and knowledge and business acumen, I'm not interested in talking to a first-year salesperson, first 3 months salesperson who has no idea about the solutions or the products we're talking about or the problems that I'm having. I want to talk to the VP or even if it's long tenured strategic sales rep. Sure, no problems. You've been doing this for 15 years. Amazing. I want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to your admin assistant. That's not the person that I want to talk to. And I think so many, you mentioned tech and AI, and so many of these things are easy now for you to, here's the three of us. I don't have anybody else helping put this together. I'm pressing the buttons to make this podcast work. Whereas back in the day, we would have gone to a venue and there'd be someone sitting in the back room pressing the buttons, and we don't need that. So I think that role of that functionary below you is becoming less and less valuable, and people see the gatekeeper process as unnecessary, which then asks the question of, okay, so how do I get my start? How do I step into sales? So I want to be a salesperson. What's the thing that I need to do to step into that first level?
What do you mean? As in role, or as in what?
Well, I know when I my very first sales role, I sold mobile phones, and someone had to take a punt and said, "You've never sold mobile phones before. I'm now happy for you to stand in a shop and pretend that you know how to sell mobile phones." Someone being a BDR, when you're stepping into a startup or one of the larger tech firms, you've never sold before, but I'm definitely not giving you a territory with a $1 million quota or even $500,000 quota when you've never sold before. That entry point used to be a BDR. So if you don't have those roles anymore, or they're becoming less and less, like there's a much smaller pipeline of people coming through, how do you fill that?
So that's a really good question. I don't think I'd even thought that far ahead, to be honest with you. I think that it's a really interesting thing, right? The role must exist because there needs to be a way into it. There is, maybe as you said, then maybe it's not a BDR, maybe it's more of a sales admin. Maybe it's someone who can shadow or share, or maybe maybe enablement becomes more focused around, people who are shadowing and are actually doing the job rather than reading it out of a book, reading it out of a textbook. Because there's certain things in.
I guess.
Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, that's all right. I guess, one of my experiences is when I'm talking to salespeople that are a bit more tenured and, the role of the BDR, etc. I challenge you both to say it's how a salesperson uses a BDR and how they engage them in all of the activities of the sales cycle to get the best out of them. So I'm not going to just ask them to cold call A to F today and say, get me 10 meetings. I'm going to sit down with my territory. I'm going to prioritize them. I'm going to have a conversation about the problems I get to solve. And I'm going to involve my BDR as a collaborator rather than as a flunky that just goes and makes a bunch of calls. So I think, to your point, Dan, starting out young in sales, you don't know what you're doing. As you work with a seasoned salesperson and do more meaningful tasks, you'll come up to speed faster. You get a good sense of what the problem you're trying to solve with your customer, and you'll get a flow of the sales cycle. And yes, you've got to do some of the mundane tasks, but I think our challenge as sales leaders is about inspiring our sales guys to use their BDRs way differently.
Yeah, but then you put a little bit more pressure on the sales person, the AE, for example. Everyone has a different way. I've worked with salespeople who are inclusive, who want to be part of that and want to use you in the journey. And then I've got others, the typical lone wolf, that don't want you anywhere near. And all you're doing is going to the coffee shop and just bringing back a latte. There are two different approaches to that. So there needs to be a certain pathway still. You being a successful rep, a BDR rep, can't just depend on who you've got as a mentor. Even though it will.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question, Dan. You and I know over our career have both been called lone wolves at different stages, but I don't think anybody would regard us now as being lone wolf. What do you think? What do you think the maturity? Cause I think there's a thing that takes you from being one of the team into being a lone wolf, and then there's another maturity curve that gets you out of it again, right? What do you think that looks like? I mean, in your experience, I kind of know what happened to me, but what was your kind of experience kind of going through that trajectory?
Yeah, I think for a long time, I was very lucky when I was at Alterian. I went through the BDR route. That I worked with a guy called Chris Chu, and he's one of the best sales leaders, sales people I've ever met in my life, right? And I feel like there was bits I understood what he was doing, but because it was a very small company and very small team, it really was just try and replicate little bits of it without understanding why he did it. And I felt that I got to this position where I'd made it through with, a relatively quick on my feet, a bit of charisma, and I felt I got to a certain point. But then it all came crashing it down with one big particular deal, and I realized that I was nowhere near. I was absolutely nowhere near this deal. I didn't understand anything. And when I started to unpick it and unpack what was going on, there were so many things I didn't know about the selling the process, their buying process, who I was selling to. It was single threaded. Yeah. Loads of these issues. And it really got me to start thinking about what was important to me as a salesperson and how I needed to do that. And that was my first change. And then the second change is when I started thinking about, after that had worked and I'd been super successful, we'd had that great couple of years at Salesforce. I had 2 wonderful years at Salesforce. And the third year was tough, right? My third year was a lot tougher from Salesforce. I think you, Dan, you managed to evolve quicker into selling a different product space. And the culture, I think you got a bit quicker than I did. And that put me in a place that I didn't like being in, which was I wasn't number one. I wasn't the top dog, and I hated that. So again, that started me thinking the same process I went before, which was great. I'd been this lone wolf. I'd copied from a lone wolf. I'd learned all the process that I felt I had. Then it was time to reassess again, and I think when it's not going well, that's when it challenges you. I think Roosevelt said, calm seas don't make a good sailor. And I think that's absolutely it. If I was to survive in that box at Salesforce, I could carry on being successful. When it changed, even within Salesforce, I didn't evolve quick enough. And I think everyone would have said the same thing. It was, what's happened to Dan Lodge? He's gone from, where's he now? And I think that was a real key part in me becoming less of a lone wolf and really understanding what I needed to do and how I needed to leverage other people.
Wow, what a story! I love it.
There you go.
And am I allowed to ask about how old you were or how many years of sales experience before you started to learn like that?
It's constantly evolving, right? Let's not beat around the bush, but that particular one was 2016. Well, when were we at Salesforce?
12 so it was 12. I joined 12. So that was probably 16. Yeah.
So what's that? 10 years ago, mid 30s.
Yeah. And that was the evolution into, we went from selling what was Radian 6 and Buddy Media. And there was an evolution of social media tech at the time. They acquired Exact Target. We had to go from selling a product that you sold to one group of people to here is this entire other suite of solutions. Again, you see this in organizations all the time, right? So everybody is trying to find that next add-on that they can either go back and sell to their current customers or expand into a new market. You're either expanding vertically within a region, you might be going regionally or whatever it may be. And just because you were successful last year doesn't necessarily mean you'll be successful next year.
Yeah.
And I think I actually saw of all people, Ed Sheeran talking about this on a clip on the weekend. And he talks about the fact that, his greatest steps forwards in his career came from abject failure, where he'd launched a song and it failed, or he'd run a concert, no one turned up, or, all these things that he learned along the way. And he said, I'm actually really interested in the people who are putting out crap music. He said, I'm interested on the factor that where did they come from and how far have they evolved? And now I can kind of see someone in 2 or 3 years that I'm going to be able to collaborate with because of where they've evolved into. I think that's a really, we all look inside our teams and in our organizations for that person who's sitting at the top. What we don't look for is that person and Dan and I have worked with some great people who've gone from BDR into account executive. One of them's sitting in Singapore now, and she's a phenomenal partner manager. And those transitions of learning along the way, and she's had some significant failures along the way. I'm sure if I get her on, we'll ask her about it. But I think we focus on those wins so much rather than the times that the deal slipped, or the customer said no, or you didn't get that promotion, or you didn't get that role. How do you react from that?
That's exactly it, Dan. That's 100%. If you don't learn from your failures, when are you going to learn? There's no helping you. Sometimes you go through this place, like I said before, when I was super successful and things were working well, everything just seemed to work. And I just felt I was doing the same thing. And then as soon as there was a bump in the road, that was when it started. That's when I had to learn from that. And I think a lot of that comes down to evolving as a salesperson, no longer relying on your sales skills. You've got to keep learning. So one of those was becoming a lot more data driven. I really started studying the metrics in which fit into it. There's a reason why the person who's making the most phone calls, sending the most emails, what the content is, all of that stuff is really, really important. And the person who's constantly out there, building their brand, having conversations. It's a game that you need to be visible. You need to be out there. You need to be connecting. You need to be learning. You need to be absorbing so many different data points. That's why it's the best and hardest job in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and I guess, Dan, you've pivoted again into a different type of role after being a salesperson. You've led sales teams now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
lucky
I
enough.
guess sorry, the delay is not great for me. But so I was going to say, as you move into that sort of sales leadership, and you kind of turn the tables now, you're seeing people in your team coming through the ranks, coming up against adversity. You're clearly judged as to how you manage your teams. How do you use the knowledge of yourself pivoting into helping others?
Yeah, that's a good question, Simon. I think the most important thing I've found about being a leader is people you're managing. You're not managing robots.
Yep.
Everyone is different. Everyone learns differently. Everyone has different motivators in their life. Everyone has different things that they want to achieve, family pressures and whatnot. And I think the most important thing about being a leader, and whether it's sales leader or anything, is you need to know who you've got in your team and what motivates them. And I think that is such an important part to everything, and something that we as sales leaders, we overlook. We just look at numbers and we just look at people and we push people and we push people, and it doesn't work like that. There's more important things in the world for people's lives. This is a job, right? It's great. Yep. We earn loads of money, but it's a job. Yep. We're not curing kids from cancer. We're selling technology. And I think that's really important, that not everybody's motivated by the same way you are. Not everyone has the same goals that you have. So you can't treat everybody the same. So I think that was as a key piece. And then it comes back, as we said before, right? Then it comes back to the metrics. Then it comes back to the numbers and building the right environment. So I think as a sales leader, not only do you need to learn about your people, you also need to understand about the environment in which you build. That environment needs to be open. It needs to be collaborative, and it needs to fit your people. We talk a lot about culture. A culture is not just putting a ping pong table in an office. Culture is about encouraging people to get together to win. And I think Dan and I, when we were at Salesforce, that culture of us just sitting in that room, going through the whiteboard, anything was on the table. You didn't feel like an idiot. You were allowed to have your conversation, and encouraging that environment in which I could learn was really, really important. I think that's another one that, sales leaders overlook as well.
Yeah, we had some really interesting culture things. I think it's worthwhile mentioning that people walk over and you mentioned putting a dartboard or a ping pong table in the office. Got nothing to do with culture. And I walk into so many offices and see when people have missed this. So I'll tell these two stories, and it's probably worthwhile. We had two things. One was if you had a deal that you were going to close, you basically were allowed to go and book out. We weren't allowed to, we just did it, right? In fact, we helped each other. If you had one meeting room you had to book, right? And if somebody caught that you'd booked that meeting room the whole day because you were trying to get a deal closed on that day or at the end of the month or quarter or whatever was happening, whatever the compelling event was, we would actually all collaborate and work together and say, hold on, Bartels or Logie or Pete Graves has got a deal to close. And we go on back to back book this one because this was the closing room. And this was where we knew that person was in closing the room. So you'd help out your colleague because you knew that they needed to have that room the whole day. And we had to cover their back, the fact that nobody else was going to go and step in and go, oh, you need to get out of Bondi 4 because that's the closing room. Get out. Yeah. It's the closing room.
Can't book that long.
And we had this other thing, which was at one point, Dan had a little sock business on the side.
That's what we talk about my successes, Dan.
But this is culture. So we had this phenomenal leader, woman called Susan St. Ledger, who went on out of Salesforce to go and lead. She ran Okta, she ran Splunk, and one day she was asking, what makes this culture of this Australian business that she was running so phenomenal? And Lodgie and I were sitting there having a beer with her at some event in Chicago or somewhere, and I said, "I tell you what it is, Lodgie, pull up your pant leg." She's like, "What are you talking about?" And we've got these colourful socks on, and I pulled mine up and said, "Here's these colourful socks." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And I turned around and yelled out to 4 or 5 of the other guys and said, "Pull your pant leg up." And everyone went, "No, straight away, what you're talking about." And everybody was wearing a pair of these socks. And we hadn't bought them for the event. Nobody had talked about, when we go away, you've got to put these socks on. They were our business time socks. This was, when we're a team, we're wearing the socks. And those are the culture things that happen in an organization underneath it, right? And it became so critical and so crucial to who we were as a team that, like, these little, community things that we built over time.
I think the other bit, though, Dan, is that I'd bought 10,000 pairs and I was giving them away for free. Probably made everyone wear the same socks, to be honest.
But I think, it's those times.
I love it.
What's a team, right? When you see groups of people do those things, we've all watched international sporting events, and when all of a sudden the people that aren't even playing know the team song, and they all know it, and they all sing it. Like, that's what builds and drives a community. And then when that team's struggling, they still all turn up and buy a ticket, because that's what that means to get behind a group and actually drive a culture and drive a motivation. And I think too often we see leaders, HR people, whoever, talk about, I'm going to put some, there's a constant meme kicking around LinkedIn and Instagram at the moment about, the pizza party. Yeah, that's not what builds a team.
Yeah. It's a hard one, because you want to.
It sounds like most of that is organic.
Sorry, Simon, you go for it.
Sorry. That's all right. It sounds like a lot of what you two are describing there is very organic in terms of its team building. So nobody forced you to wear the socks. Nobody, forced you into behaving the way you did about that meeting room. I guess as a leader now, how do you encourage that sort of behaviour? And I think you kind of touched on it before. You make people feel wanted and enjoy their time, etc. Yes, you've got to focus on the numbers, but there's something else in there that you're kind of describing that builds an organic feeling that a team's really doing well.
Yeah, look, I think you've got to be there, ready to invest in people. You've got to be there. You've got to have their back. First things first, right? It's a cutthroat environment, sales. So everybody needs to know that they have your back, and a good sales leader has your back. They have your back above his boss. When they don't, it's too obvious. The culture's too toxic. You need to protect and you need to encourage, but everybody must be accountable to that. So everybody in that team who wants to be accountable must pull their weight. If you say you're going to do certain things, then great. Then you build that innovative cultural where it's teamwork. I mean, you still needs to be competitive. You still need to have the leaderboard, who's top dog, but it can't be all about that, because that then changes the culture. If you don't have that environment before, then it just becomes a typical salesperson thing, which is, oh, I'm the top dog, I'm doing that. But are you adding more to your team? And I think, again, in my evolution as a salesperson, I've gone through that piece. I feel like now it's more important for me to add value to people as well as sell big deals.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
So, I mean, you're actually really good at that. I mean, we've worked together for a long time now, and I was always struck by when we look at our teams, the ability to look at those people that are performing as well as the people that are not performing, and how do you either have some difficult conversations sometimes because people can be in the wrong role or just not be in the right space in their lives right now for taking this on, and how do you have those tough conversations, but also how do you support the person that's sitting at the bottom as well as the person that's sitting at the top, because they're like, you can't just roll out the same motivation tactic for the two people. So, I mean, how do you approach that?
Look, I think a little bit about what D2 just talked about, Dan. Look, I think respecting people, you just get to know them. And I think I've worked with a lot of leaders in my life, some that I would absolutely imitate, and then some that I would run a mile from being anything like. And I think the leaders that I really resonated with in my formative years, I didn't feel like they were my boss. They were genuinely interested in the ideas I had, were genuinely interested in me wanting to learn a bit of more about things. So, as a young person growing up, I was genuinely curious. So take the flip side of that, I hire really smart people. Most of them have got pretty significant background. Some have come out of the military. Others have flown, jet airplanes or jumbo jets, to name a few of the sort of left field people I've hired over the years. I hired the bass guitarist of Frenzal Rum at one point, and you may know Lex Felton. It's and I don't only hire people left field, but I guess what I'm saying is those sort of people have done something in their background, are genuinely curious. And I think as a leader, I then want to talk to people that are just starting out in their career. So I'm really curious about them, what motivates them. And 99 times out of 100, these people have got a wonderful story. So once you get behind the story of the person you're leading and what motivates them, a little bit about their family, you talk to them about, hey, look, that presentation you did the other day, that was pretty shit, wasn't it? Let's have a chat about how you felt going into it, what you thought about beforehand. Did you prepare as you were delivering it? Did you know what you were going to talk about, what you want to leave the prospect with? And you do it in such a way that it's not combative, I know everything and you don't. And I think then the next step is, rather than me telling that person how to do a good presentation, I think they know how to do it. You tell me, what would you do differently next time? And then we workshop it together. So very much the nature of it is, and it's time consuming, right? But you can typically knock off a conversation like that in about 30 minutes. And if you're genuinely curious about the person, you dig into them, you understand them, they'll want to do better for you and they'll come and ask you. And I think the other thing that is absolutely critical is you foster that. So it's not just me to my team, it's people amongst each other. So you're allowed to ask a dumb question. You're allowed to say, I don't know what to do next in my deal. And if you have a bunch of people around that see that I'm not going to be overly critical of everybody that makes a mistake, the team themselves will start talking to each other and opening up and learning. So I think that's one of the secrets.
Simon, on that, really, really, absolutely, I agree with absolutely everything there. And obviously you're an expert at this. I have a question for you, if that's all right, on this kind of podcast. How do you know when to...
Of course it is.
Thanks, mate. How do you know when to stop investing in the person? How do you know when you've created that, you want to invest time in people? How do you know when enough's enough, there's other places that I can be focusing on or helping the other rest of the team, and we may have to manage this person out of the business, for example?
I can think of quite a few of those over the years. Look, I think one particular instant I had with a pretty good salesperson that we got on with. It was all good. I felt I'd invested a lot of time in helping them, and I got a lot of angst back, a lot of anger, a lot of just not really wanting to engage in a two-way conversation. So they weren't angry about something in their personal life. They weren't angry about other things. They just weren't vested in us talking openly to each other. And then when the numbers started to decline, I'd always said, look, if I've got a problem with a person, I'm usually pretty honest with them up front. Here's where it's going. Let's work together. And if it doesn't get there, they know. And I remember the conversation I had. It's, look, sorry, mate, it's it's time to go. We've had this conversation, but the point I gave up on that is when the two-way conversation wasn't being entertained. It was me trying to lean in and be curious, and all I got was a lot of angst and frustration directed at me. And that's, that's a shame. I've had a couple of those. I've had others where I'm really good friends with the person and I've had to let them go. And that's the toughest one. That really is tough. And the person I'm thinking of is actually a reference for him in his next role. So it was never personal, but I had to separate what was right for the company and what was right for the person. And that person is doing exceptional things in technology elsewhere. So, I think you do have to give up at some point on it. The tell for me is when they stop investing in the two-way conversation.
Yeah. And I think you've just, said a really important piece as well. Not only that, understanding from, you read people obviously being a leader, but them not investing. The other part I think was a really interesting point you made, which is surprises are only for birthdays. It can't be a surprise. If someone knows they're having these conversations, it can't be hey, this is your performance review. And they go, what? I had no idea. It's got to be documented. They need to know. Everything needs to be accountable. The numbers and the expectations, there needs to be almost a team charter in place. I want you to commit to win, and I want you to commit to do these other things. You've got to update Salesforce. You've got to do your handover doc this way. You've got to engage with SEs and the CSM team in this way. And once you've committed to that, then I've got something that we've all got as a base mark and a benchmark. And from that commitment, then there's no surprises because you've not done this, 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 and this. And I've got real examples. It no longer becomes personal. It no longer becomes, I don't like you. It's because you didn't do these five or six things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sales is kind of unique in that perspective because unlike many other roles, we have a built-in barometer, measure, scoreboard of what your results are, on whatever time frame you measure them. And typically, even if you're on an annual number, I'm recording the numbers along the way. If you're on a quarterly, a monthly, weekly, daily, whatever it is, along the way how I'm performing. If you're in retail and you've got a daily number, by lunchtime, I'm not going to get there today, right? If you're on a monthly number, on the weeks going through the month that, hey, I just don't have the runs on the board, that this is going to look pretty bad. And I think there's an ownership on leaders to be able to say to their people, it's not just the number. It's the things that go towards the number. And yes, you can swing and close a big deal and get yourself out of trouble, but do you have the pipeline? Have you got the general motions happening behind that this can be consistent, that you're going to perform at the level that we continue to afford to pay you the way we're paying you? Because we don't produce anything else. Salespeople only produce new revenue. We don't produce continued revenue. That's account management. That's a different role altogether, and I think for us as leaders, though, we've got to look at it's not just the outputs. It's the things that get you to the outputs that we have to measure them on and we have to coach them on and work people along the way. But I think you've also got to own that as a salesperson as well. You've got to understand if I'm not getting success and if I'm not getting that leadership from my boss, and sometimes you won't get it. Sometimes that person may be a phenomenal leader for 80% of the rest of the team, but you just don't get along. It's on you. Are you going to go and get that leadership from somebody else, that mentorship, or find a coach or whatever it is, right? Talk to two-level boss, whatever the story is. But you've got to kind of do that as well. But as leaders, you've got to own that story and say, is this person, are we giving them all the tools to win?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Dan. Especially in a big business where you understand where it's a sausage machine, what goes in, what comes out roughly, right? Mm-hmm. But it's also really important in some of these smaller organizations. And some of the smaller organizations, you are the barometer. So I must trust you as a salesperson. I must trust you as a sales team to do what's needed to be done. Yeah. Because from then we have an early barometer in how do we have product market fit? Yeah. Are we selling into the right space? Are we really going after our ideal customer? And without understanding that and doing the right things, we never know. And if we're a year late on on finding out these numbers, or we can't trust the people, we're going to make bad business decisions as leaders, especially leaders who are trying to steer the ship in the right direction. I've been in places before where there wasn't a great product market fit. And that's a really important thing. And that's not the salesperson's fault. But there's a little bit on the salesperson to provide that feedback so that those decisions can be made.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question there about the actual role of marketers versus salespeople, right? And, people think marketers are advertisers, and they're not. They build markets. They build an understanding of where does our product fit and where does it sit. I mean, we've all three of us on this call have worked in organizations where, because we're big enough, we probably don't have any product market fit, but we're big enough to kind of ram this stuff down a whole bunch of people's throat and actually create product market fit rather than there fundamentally being one at the beginning. And a market shifts because you've got a, big German brand or a big American brand sitting on top of this, and as a result, everybody thinks it's good. It isn't necessarily the case, and there's a whole bunch of competitors who've probably got a better product than you, but they don't have as wider sales team or as good a fit to just getting people through the door to run those transactions. So it's an interesting sort of challenge for organizations to do.
Isn't that part of the fun, working for smaller businesses after working for a really big one or two in your career? Dan, I know that's your path.
Oh God, it is. It is absolutely. But before I take that one, I was just back to Dan's comment. I think one thing I believe is, especially in a smaller company, everything must. I mean, the big company as well, right? Everything must be aligned. And I think the most important thing about this is everybody must speak the same language, because you get so many places where there are bits between what's the marketer speaking. I'm speaking, conversions, click rates, etc. That's not the same language that the salesperson. Oh, I'm talking about pipeline generated, and having a consistent conversation or consistent language across the whole organization is massively important. And it's important because what the marketer's seeing, what the salesperson's seeing, the customer success team is seeing, needs to be adopted or understood by product, by engineering, because they're the people who are taking the organization in the right direction. So we should be thinking about what's the pain that we're solving for. That's important. And what's the impact? And that must be consistent across the whole organization, because like you said, Dan, building markets is important, but you need everything. If you're building a market without the right product to put into that, well, then you're going in the wrong direction. So that's something I certainly have come across and been on the tougher end of, the harder part of. Sales is the easy people to point the finger at. You're not doing enough, but if the marketer's not getting the right results or providing that feedback to each other and have the wrong KPIs, and that we have the wrong ones for product as well, then we're going to have a messed up business. But Simon, you're right. I have been in that place between larger company. I mean, at the time, Salesforce wasn't the behemoth it is today, so I presume it didn't have the same politics. There were some politics there, but it was always an incredibly well-oiled machine. And I think there's some really key points that we need to take. And again, I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, it's a mindset shift. It really is. If you want to go and move from a Salesforce, an SAP, whoever, and you want to go into startup world, well, then you've got to go with your eyes wide open. You've got to go in expecting that the buck stops with you. Everything you must do, you must wake up in the morning thinking about it. Depends on your seniority in the company, whatsoever. But every time you want to do a job, you must make sure it's done. I don't know how many times at the first organization at Alterian with the management there, and it was a simple question like, right, I need to print out this contract. Do we have a printer? No. Do we have paper? No. And in that scenario, it was just get in your car down, pop up the road and go to Officeworks and buy one. That was the answer. But that was a mindset. It was like, oh, okay, get it over. Otherwise, that's going to waste half a day.
Yeah.
Conversations about things that are sort of irrelevant. So it's certainly, I believe, a massive mindset, but there's some really important things that you can take from that. I think make sure you've got a really strong value prop. That's something that bigger organizations tend to do better than small organizations. Smaller organizations tend to have a good piece of technology. And do they have a market fit? Do they have, is it a CEO's vanity or an engineer's vanity that we're fixing here? Do you have a strong value prop? And then the other part, I think that the biggest gap that we always fell into or had fallen into is, do we really understand our target market? Do we really understand that target market? Do we know what we're trying to do here? Do we know what they do? If you think about as Salesforce has moved and progressed into even industry focuses, it's great. Know about the industry focus. They're bringing in really smart people from that industry. They're bringing in retail experts. They're bringing in car manufacturing experts. And that's great because that knowledge, you can't just develop a product and go to market without doing a day's work in that environment. We were selling a BlueDot. It was, we're selling to fast food. And we worked out there was only 2 people in the organization who'd ever worked in a fast food organization before. But we all needed to understand how it worked, right? We all needed to see what their pains were. We needed to be behind the counter. We needed to see what the burger comes out and put the sauce on and serve the people and people coming through the car park. We had no understanding of that. So really define that target market and learn about it is things that I think it's obviously comes down to resourcing. Small organizations don't have that luxury that they can bring in the CEO of Renault or whatever it is and bring them in. It's a hard thing to do.
So how did you fix that problem? You're at BlueDot. You don't have any fast food knowledge, and you guys are a geofencing business. How did you close the gap?
Dan, you have to get out there and do it. It's come back to this startup mentality. We even got the team at one point to. So what we were doing at BlueDot was the click to collect process. That whole process from order, and then you pick it up. So we even created a process where we wanted the team to be in fast food restaurants. I wanted them in there. I wanted to see how many people how many cars were coming through. What was the typical experience for people? How many people were served? How many people turned away? How many people got and saw the line was too big? Really understand that. And that just simply came from, I want you to go and sit outside there. I want you to go and sit there. I want you to record it. It was also good because then you could go and speak to the customer and say, hey, look, I know your environment because I was actually sat out there on Thursday afternoon and I know you had this many people come through, that many people through the drive-through. Therefore, if you could improve your process by 30 seconds, 40 seconds, whatever it was, you're starting to have a conversation about business value. Again, no longer about a piece of technology, which is a location piece of technology. You're having a conversation about 50 cars coming through and saving 30 seconds. Well, hold on a minute. Times that by how many franchisees do you own? How many are there in the state? And you've got a business case. And learning about that business case, it also helps you then define the product you want to build because you understand the pain point. But Dan, it was, there was nowhere better than just go in there and sit there and spend time in there.
Yeah.
Everyone put on a few kilos, but
I think a lot of reps forget that, right? Which is just get involved in your customer's business somehow. We all worked with a particular Dutchman who was renowned for it, and he would go and do time in different organizations or do ride-alongs, right? And he's a senior strategic rep now runs teams, but he would do it regularly. And I think it's a lost art sometimes of how do you go and have that conversation with a person who doesn't even think they want to buy from you yet. They've got no interest in this. But realistically, in my entire sales career, I've never had a customer or prospect say no to someone who wants to come and learn about their business.
Yeah. Can you remember that story?
Yeah, absolutely.
The guy in San Francisco who sold one of the biggest deals ever at Salesforce, and he actually went and got a job there.
Yeah. So this is this is a great story, right? So This at the time for about 5 or 6 years was the largest deal that Salesforce had ever done. And it was to, what was the insurance company called?
State Farm, I think.
State Farm, yeah. And so he wanted to go and do this deal at State Farm. And as part of it, he said, well, I need to genuinely understand where are their pain points. He went and got a job at State Farm. So he told them what he was doing, and he said, listen, I'm going to come and work part-time in your call center. And I went, okay, great, like, sure. And they paid him, and he did the metrics. He worked there for 6 months. Right. So the story goes, I'm paraphrasing now somebody else's anecdote, but this is a pretty well-known story. And on the back of that, then he said, I've worked for you guys for 6 months. These are all the problems you have. Do you want to talk about this? I said, absolutely. Because leadership didn't know these things were happening, didn't know the problems, didn't know there were solutions to them. And for years, they were the largest customer at Salesforce by a country mile. And he built the biggest deal by a factor of 2 or 3x, I believe, at the time. But it was the world's best ride along.
Yeah,
but
absolutely. It's interesting. I guess
business.
There's so many anecdotes like that. I think you were alluding to it before. I think there was a certain garbage collection company that we were selling to, and he got up at 4 a.m. and literally rode on the back garbage trucks to understand the process from collecting through to the to the depot. That's I don't think every sales guy would do that, but he was certainly successful because he knew the business, and I think there's a certain amount of respect he got because he was actually genuinely interested in the problem we were solving, not sort of putting it on a PowerPoint, putting it in practice.
Becomes a different door opener when you say, hey, listen, I've got a 6-month case study here that I want to share with you. You didn't pay any money for, and I'm an expert in this technology space. Do you want to talk about it? Yes, of course I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, pleasure. Yeah.
So Dan, we alluded before, you've gone from BDR to senior strat AE to running teams, worked in big tech, worked in small businesses. Mm-hmm. If you had to go back and do a couple of things differently, or what are those key lessons out of all of that? What do you reckon they'd do?
So a really good question, Dan. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I made, probably fairly recently, was trying to appease everybody, trying to make sure that everybody was happy with what I was doing. I was afraid because of getting the job. I didn't really push back enough. I didn't push back and say, I've been here, I've done this, I know where this is going. We're not at the point where you think we're at. I think that was an important part. I should have pushed back there. The company was in a great spot, really good position. And I think it needed a little bit more, insight. Maybe it needed 2 or 3 voices like mine coming through to say, actually, we're not ready to get to this point right now. I mean, look, it was a hard time. We had, the industry changed, right? It was growth at all costs, and then it became building a sustainable business. And we weren't at a point ready to build a sustainable business. And I think we all needed to understand where we were. So first I should have pushed back and really, made sure that, and the reason I didn't push back is because I didn't have the actual underlying data.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really key thing, right? Which is we think we're the smartest people in the room, but the reality is this has been done before. It's been done by many, many people earlier than us, smarter than us. So the data is out there. So being able to use this data, being educated, being knowledgeable in this space to say, this is a sales cycle. It typically looks like this. This is how if you're going to sell $1 million deal, these are the things that it has to fit to. It's going to take this long, or it's going to need this many leads, and it's going to need this many conversations, and you're going to need this many teams, and your team's going to be structured this way. And I think having that data and being knowledgeable on that is really important to push back. Would have been for me, and just being able to have those conversations. And the second part is creating an environment in the exec team. It's always great doing it in your team, in your sales team, but creating an environment in the exec team where everyone's able to have these conversations and these conversations are well thought out. We're moving in the right direction. You're not afraid to say something. It's just not going to get vetoed because someone has a bigger job title.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part, that team you build, that environment's got to live at the top, because ultimately it's the top down that creates and defines the culture. Maybe that's values.
Yeah. What about going through your sales career? So if you think about it as an IC, going back on, what are the things you'd make sure you did more of or you do less of?
Yeah, I think, like I explained earlier on, I've been through that journey where things were good, things were bad, and you've got to look at the times and the fixes piece. I think the reality is you never stop learning, never stop getting, too precious that you think you know everything. So never stop learning. The other one is keep looking again at that data and those numbers. There's no substitute for doing the effort, doing the time. There's no substitute for building the relationships. They'll last with you forever. Look at them as relationships for more than just your current work environment. We live in Australia, right? We're going to bump into these people forever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
It's a big country town.
It's a big country town, and we need to make sure we have these conversations, we respect our relationships, and we can use them on and on. So have a view that whenever you speak to someone, you're delivering trust and value. It's really important to them, and communication, and constantly keep this open, right? You're doing a great job with this podcast. Be invisible, keep talking. The reality is, a relationship with a senior exec can't just exist because it's 2 days before the end of the quarter.
Yes.
Can't just exist. It's got to be onwards and onwards. So look, I think doing the basics right, Dan, listening to myself a lot more, and learning what's going on in what I'm doing. And I've always been lucky to work with really good people. So it's a team sport as much as you're the one with you're the head. It's certainly a team sport, and everyone needs to come on that ride with you. And they've got to believe in you. They've got to want to help you. You've got the best SEs, the best CS team in the world. Well, let them want to work on your deals and no one else.
Yep. Now, I know we're getting kind of to the top of the hour, but we did kind of mention this in the prep to this. It's on everyone's sort of general conversation at the moment. What are for the team predictions? AI plus sales plus BDR. What are your thoughts?
Mine is a really good question. I think that we just spoke a minute ago about the expertise of all the knowledge that we have. When I wish I'd have had that extra knowledge to be able to make a better decision. AI's got that. So maybe it changes the job of the VP. Maybe that VP no longer becomes the person who's got the knowledge, who's been around the block. Maybe they become somebody who is better at two things. One is selling, right? And then the second part is actually looking after enabling their team.
Yep.
So maybe you have two people in that organization, that one's the salesperson and one's the person to enable or getting the most from them or knows the data models. I think that it no longer has to be one person at the top. And I think the other thing is there is going to be no substitute in the account exec place for people and good people. And I think that people in that space should get the credit they deserve. Sales is the best job. Sales management is great, but it's not as good as, is not important to the company as the people doing the job. So therefore, start respecting that and start bringing that up, that they should be the most highly paid people in the company, because they're the ones who've got that relationship. They've built that network. If I want to go and sell to banks, who do I go and speak to? I don't go and speak to, I want to make sure that that salesperson is the one who's connecting me to it. And it's not just their knowledge of, revenue structures and, enablement strategies. It's someone who's actually got there and doing the sales piece. I'll pass that over though.
Simon, what do you reckon?
That's wise words.
AI.
I love that. Well, I'll just go back to Dan's comment there. It's incredible. It's about doing the extra effort. And I think that tie that into AI. I think that for me, AI is an awesome aggregator of knowledge. And I think it's you ask it the right question. At the moment, we're pretty nascent, right? So we're asking it questions and we're getting a wealth of knowledge and content back. But I think it's going the extra mile to take the content and do something useful with it for your customer. And I think, I watch my 13-year-old doing her homework, and do I think AI will make her submit better papers? Possibly, but will she learn anything from it? Possibly not. A similar thing I'd say to the AE or the salesperson going out there trying to make a difference for their prospect. Sure, use the AI, use the data, and I think, Dan, you mentioned it. I think the AI right now is a better aggregator of data, or a faster aggregator of data and intelligence about a topic than we've ever had. Mm-hmm. But you've got to put it in the hands of somebody that's going to go the extra mile with it. And I think that's what's different to an AE. I like your thought about splitting the top. Your sales guy is the most important part of the business. I think I partially agree with you. Mm-hmm. I think a poor sales team can destroy a business. Mm-hmm. A great sales team won't make just a brilliant business. I think you've got to lead the charge. I think you've got some wonderfully focused individuals who are salespeople. Somebody needs to point them in the right direction and give them the encouragement. I'm talking to two Dans who are two salespeople, and sometimes your egos are fragile, your motivation is limited, etc. You're going to need to have somebody to push that in the right direction. That's my 2 cents worth, and I think we've probably gone over.
Yeah, I'll just add my last bit before we wrap up. But it's AI is never going to replace humans. As in, I'm never going to have a long-term relationship with an AI. My customer's never going to be an AI, and it's highly unlikely that you'll have everyone is just run between two AIs talking to each other. Like, that's not the world. So people, if I break it down to the most basic transactions, it's going to be a commoditized conversation if my local coffee shop and the barista is an AI. I'm going to choose to go on to someone who's human, who won my forks and wild for a coffee, who's actually going to engage with me and understand me and my family and what my history is and what did I do, and cares about me for the weekend, right? Mm-hmm. If that's all replaced with, I can't see a world where that's replaced just with vending machines, because those technologies have been around for a long time and it's never ever worked. So I don't see the human aspect of within organizations and decision making being completely replaced by AI. We have to learn to use it. We have to learn to become more functional with it. Even in our sales careers, I recall when CRMs didn't exist. They were a foreign concept, right? And that's now just become part and parcel of what you use to manage your flow of information. AI will probably become one of those things. What it's not going to replace is your customer's still going to be a human. You're a human selling to them. The people you work with are humans. And how do I operate in that space? I've got a whole bunch of additional tools, and they make me either more effective or they change where they operate. But at the end of all of these tools, there are still humans. And I think, Dan, you mentioned sales is one of the best roles in the world. I agree. It's one of the hardest roles in the world. And people stepping into sales need to understand you lose more than you win. And there are very, very few careers in which you lose significantly more than you win. And if you can deal with that, like that's the bit that people get upset about in sales, that you lose so often. And you've got to have a thick skin as a result of that. If you can get through that, you can use AI, you can use the technology, then you will make a lot of money and you'll be successful and you'll have a great career. And it's fun. When you win in sales, it's super fun.
It's got to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
absolutely.
That's my 2 cents. Simon, thanks for joining us. Dan, thanks for joining us as our guest today. It's been a great chat. For everyone listening out there, wherever you are listening, please subscribe or like, share this with your friends. If this has been interesting, share it with your colleagues. If you have some recommendations of topics or people you'd like us to talk to, or if you'd like to talk to us, please reach out. We're obviously on LinkedIn, YouTube. There's a Facebook page. Jump on, give us some comments, give us some feedback. We appreciate it. I'll talk to you all you guys next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks.